time.
Yeah. So the presentation I'll give now just concerns this book, Music Artist Managers, Remuneration and Retention in the popular music business. And it does lock into this book in a number of ways that I'll explore when we do our In Conversation panel. And the book was published on the 5th of July this year, and I'll outline the background to it, method, and why it's significant. So popular music plays a central role in our culture and society. It not only provides enjoyment and entertainment, but popular songs can also unite us as a community, help us to understand who we are, and inspire us to enact political, social, and personal change. And these benefits derive from the musical and artistic output of music artists. So their commitment is the foundation upon which our musical life depends. And this book is significant because it addresses concerns about how music artist managers who support such artists are in turn supported or not in terms of remuneration, retention, leadership, incentivization, motivation, reward, and ultimately their overall treatment by those who hire them, artists. So the core research problem driving this book is to what extent is it possible for managers to do good, enjoyable and fulfilling work in music artist management? So by investigating the quality of the subjective experience of music artist managers, the book lays the foundation for the development of needs-based solutions to some of the issues that music artist managers face. And I see Brian Long's in the audience. He actually copy-edited the book, so he's probably having post-traumatic, trauma listening to the words. But they're polished. Does it sound polished? Yeah, sort of. Thank Brian Long, everybody. One significant theme that the book highlights is that in many instances, music artists need, perhaps counterintuitively, to better lead and manage their managers. And Kim Goodwin gave feedback on the book too. She's another lecturer here. And she said, you'll have to explain that bit. Like that's not, you think it's just obvious to the reader, it's not. So I wrote this bit in response to Kim's feedback, which is, while this proposition may initially seem odd, bear with me. First, music artists need to understand that if they have a manager or want to attract one, they have the responsibility of leading and managing and incentivizing and motivating them. And second, they need to understand that the other stakeholders surrounding music artists, such as record labels, song publishers, and live music promoters, may not have an interest in helping to ensure that the management sector is economically sustainable. It's in artists' interest to have strong, independent managers who do not have conflicts of interest, because their interests will align with their own. And without experienced managers to help artists leverage better deals, artists risk becoming even more subservient to the choke points that big tech and big content companies use to capture creative labour markets. So many record labels traditionally, and nowadays also entities like Spotify, YouTube and Live Nation, build monopolies where sellers have power over buyers, and monopsonies where buyers have power over sellers. Cultural economics link there for the AMGT 90018 students. Who aren't also in Kim's subject, which clashes with this time. So anyway, these monopolies and monopsonies siphon away much of the values that artists create. So the key question here is, why are the people who have the job of looking out for the best interests of artists themselves on agreements that make them relatively disposable? Why is that exactly? While artists, lawyers, accountants and booking agents also look out for their artists' interests, these stakeholders usually form a team that is built and led by the manager. And the question is, are music artist managers in insecure, vulnerable and increasingly unsustainable positions in the music business because of the behind the scenes politicking of major record labels and other powerful entities with whom managers are supposed to negotiate? Or is the situation more benign than this? Is it more akin to the glass of water analogy that Shane used, where it's like, well, they're just not thinking about the issues around this. But either way, The position the research participants featured in the book have found themselves in is derivative of how power has historically worked in the music business. And as veteran Australian-Canadian artist manager Michael McMartin, to whom the book is dedicated, because he passed away before he could see the result. But Michael's quotes made it their way to the top. Like before Michael passed away, he actually was the first pull quote in the book, which was great. So Michael's quote is, quote, "There's an inverse pyramid. Right at the bottom is the creator. Without the creator, there isn't anything to build on, but all of the power, all of the rules, everything starts up here." When you hear the phrase trickle-down economics, that defines how creative arts money flows. The pennies trickle down to the creators, and it's just so obscenely unfair, end quote. So in the book, I explore the interests of music artists managers, interests that for the most part align with artists' interests. And this is primarily where the significance of the book lies. Strengthening the music artist manager community has the potential to help more pennies trickle down to the creators. And there are ways to do this without artists handing over more of their finite revenue to their managers. Better leadership and management of managers by artists and governments has the potential to unlock significant cultural and economic value within the music industries overall, while helping to decentralise and distribute power in the industries. And I'll talk later about how this idea of decentralisation, I think, is a point of resonance with Shain's book in terms of local music ecosystems and cities, and how dispersed the conclusions here are in terms of what Shain's advocating for. At least I mean, you can have a right to reply to that too, before I tell you more about what's in Shain's head, because I don't really know. But I did read the book. I did finish it. So yeah, I was like a fanboy in Norway at Christensen Roundtable Conference. It's like, Shain had his mobile phone, and I bought it with my card, and yeah, and I've written all over it. So has Shain. He signed it too, and I scribbled all over it. So anyway.
It's embarrassing for both of you.
So in the book, I use theories relating to negative leadership versus motivational leadership to help us understand both artist to manager leadership and manager to artist leadership. And for those of you who know Kim Goodwin, you'll know that she had input on that. I had to go, hey, Kim, read all this leadership-y stuff and give me feedback, because it was new to me in terms of engaging with it and writing about it. So I used self-determination theory to explain managers' motivation and to present a framework for need-supportive artist to manager leadership that encompasses both financial and non-financial rewards. So according to SDT, or self-determination theory, autonomy, relatedness, and competence are three universal psychological needs that are essential for optimal human development and functioning. And this theory is used to explain the non-financial reward management among music artist managers. And combined, these theories explain both financial and non-financial reward management. And this matters because managers play a role in building and maintaining commercial music ecosystems. There's the link. I didn't even write that in. That's a natural link to Shain's book. So the incentivization and motivation of managers is crucial to the flourishing of these ecosystems. And I think what Shain talks about is really this need to think more holistically about music ecosystems within a city, to think about all the different policies that music could be embedded within, as well as having a standalone music policy. But music artists managers see and touch all the jigsaw puzzle pieces that form an artist's career. They're the only ones who do that beside the artists themselves. So it's, yeah, that's, I think, a bit of a parallel. So how is the research conducted? So to investigate these drivers among managers, I used a multi-method approach. It involved a survey, interviews, and focus groups. It was commissioned research by the Association of Artist Managers in Australia. And I won't go too much more into the methods. You'll think you're in AMGT 90029 with Dr. Brian Long rabbiting on about sample sizes and qualitative methods. So the work of Giblin and Doctorow and their book Choke Point Capitalism, How Big Tech and Big Content Companies Capture Creative Labour Markets and How We'll Win Them Back, was very influential on my book through the way in which it provides a broad historical context for the work of independent managers. And Giblin and Doctorow outlined the one-sided nature of many major label record deals. They cited the case of the artist Prince in the early 90s, changing his name to an unpronounceable symbol in protest at the fact that he did not own his own master copyright in his recordings due to an agreement that he signed in 1977 when he was 19 years old. And they noted that, quote, this bitter fight was playing out at a time that major record labels had a vice grip on the industry. They controlled radio airplay, print and television media, as well as distribution into stores, and they were abusing that power in breathtaking ways, end quote. Power. I did that in Hanover. I presented this in Hanover. I was pleased with that moment of slide presentation. Power. So Giblin and Doctorow worked through several examples of low royalties and recording agreements and argued that the way that the royalties stream is used to recoup advances paid by labels for recording costs was and is unfair. They noted that if artists did recoup their advance from their income, somewhere between 2% and 12% of net earnings from record sales, the label still owned the master copyright in their recordings. And Giblin and Doctorow cited American guitarist Nile Rodgers, who also features in Shane's book toward the end, who highlighted the issue, saying that the music business is the only business where after you pay off the mortgage on the house, they still own the house. So while some artists can leverage license deals instead of assigning their copyright to labels nowadays, Giblin and Doctorow continued, quote, with few exceptions, contracts signed from the 1970s to the 2000s, when major labels were at their peak power and abuses against artists were most rife, still govern use of that music today. And I think that in Shane's book toward the end, he talks about how during the pandemic, live music tanked, but streaming and big content companies benefited dramatically. And I think that is largely due to back catalogue as well in these deals. So if you think about it, if the deals were done in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the royalties were 2%, 12%, say Radiohead was on in 1990, they're still paying out according to those deals. And everyone's able to access back catalogue. So indeed, when some record labels profess support for Black Lives Matter movement that started in 2020, mid-2020, Josh Kahn called out the hypocrisy by suggesting that they start with amending contracts, distributing royalties, diversifying boardrooms, and retroactively paying back all the Black artists and their families they have built their empires on. So influential independent label Beggars Group began forgiving heritage artists recruitment debts after 15 years, and Sony announced in 21 that they would do something similar. And Universal Music Group has since followed suit as well. So CEO of Beggars Group, Martin Mills, also called for a minimum royalty rate of 15% in 2016. That, to my knowledge, hasn't been realised. So the one-sided record deals of the past are being undone in these ways, and new artists can negotiate higher royalties now too. And Giblin and Doctorow pointed out that in the past, American R&B act TLC received 2% of the US 175 million generated by their music. And in the 1950s and 70s, a 4% royalty was common. During the CD boom, it was 7% on average, whilst Radiohead's deal signed in 91 was a 12% royalty. Nowadays, because recorded music is cheaper to produce and distribute, and the internet has led to more competition, 25% is becoming standard, and some labels will pay. It's doing this weird things. No, I don't want to copy. Anyway, not as good off the cuff like Shane, so I've got my script. So anyway, so 50% is the royalty, especially if they don't pay in advance. And indeed, Mumford & Sons feature in Shane's book, and they signed in the US in circa 2009, 2010, to Glassnote Records, and they did what was called a royalty-driven deal. So they got, these aren't the actual figures, but to get the gist, they got about a $30,000 advance against a 15% net royalty. So the advance is recouped really quickly because of the 50-50 sort of share with the label. And then they cracked the US. Like, that's amazing. Like, that's huge in terms of what that means for those artists. So one of the lawyers I interviewed noted that the environment has changed and artists now have more options. They can sign directly to a label, either licensing or assigning the master copyright in their recordings. They can put their recordings out themselves, or they can release their music by way of label services deals simply involve the artist using some of the services a label provides, but not full service. And the example given was a music distribution company advancing an artist $100,000 for marketing costs in exchange for the distributor receiving a 30% participation in the income for 3 to 4 years, with the artist receiving the balance, after which time the artist receives 100% if the artist is recouped. And this is a model that the Orchard put forth, which is a company that's also mentioned in Shane's book. However, while power relations within the music business have changed, and this has influenced the remuneration structures and systems, with both heritage artists and new artists in many instances being able to obtain better deals, major record labels are still powerful, just in a different way. So music streaming has made major labels vast back catalogues of master copyrights, which in many instances they still own, more profitable due to the ease of access facilitated by streaming. So despite them now waiving some recoupment debts, the royalties they pay out are still determined by the deals of the past. And that, in a way, has perpetuated the status quo. If you think about what Giblin and Doctorow talk about in their book, they've invested in the streaming services Spotify. So Spotify had to agree certain terms to grant them the rights to use the music, and then it's using back catalogue. Therefore, major record labels are still very powerful and dominant. And the bigger picture here is that they derive value from commercialising their back catalogues while streamlining their services when it comes to new signings by externalising the risks onto artists to fund new recordings. And the label required to produce and promote these recordings in many instances onto managers. All the while generating a lot of revenue from their deep catalogues and a small number of successful new international artists who dominate streaming. And this music ecosystem is leading to unsustainable workloads for managers, because they're still being the manager, but they're also being the label, but they're not being remunerated for the two services, different services. So unsustainable workloads that lead to managers burning out have the byproduct of muting resistance to monopolistic label power to the detriment of artists. And major labels have essentially admitted that the past deals they did with artists are unfair through the way in which they're subsequently tweaking them in the age of streaming. And when knowledgeable, experienced and talented managers lead the business, artists are less able to resist major label dominance and power. And nowadays, streaming service dominance and power in the live music industry, entities like Live Nation's dominance and power, obviously they're not the only one, they always get picked on, but it's fun to pick on Live Nation. While in the recorded music industry, new artists can now often leverage more favourable terms, the byproduct of these better deals can be manager burnout. And when artists remain independent or do label service deals, the risk and reward that used to vest with record labels and song publishers is externalized onto them and their management. So my book presents new models for music artist manager retention, and the models that are presented are not designed to simply enable managers to muscle their way in between music artists and their audiences to capture a greater share of the monetary value that flows between them. The value managers bring to the relationship is the ability to increase the artist's piece of the pie. So whilst the models and solutions presented in my book will increase the manager's share, theoretically, by growing their slice, the artist share will grow too. And a strong and independent music artist manager community, one that can offer frank and fearless advice to clients, is needed for artists to be able to wrestle back some of the value that's co-opted by powerful corporations. This is a David and Goliath scenario, and music artists' livelihoods are at stake here too. So the book goes on to talk about various alternate models that are being discussed at length. I presented at Big Sound on a panel that was hosted by the Association of Artist Managers that had three ex-managers, including myself, and one current manager, talking about new models. And I'm doing a presentation for the Music Managers Forum in the UK because they're a little bit more advanced in terms of new models for how to move beyond the 20% commission model for managers to alternate models. The one key theme is really better enduring entitlements for artist managers, whether that's a better long-term participation in income through the post-term commission clause, or whether it's through setting up a company for an album and then having a model with similar to startups where equity is given to stakeholders so that they are incentivized to increase the value of the collection of works or album, and it would give more fluidity to the how the music ecosystem works essentially. It's similar. It's more an artist-led and manager-led solution than a legislative one. Giblin and Doctorow have this they put an argument which is about changing copyright law for a similar reason, which is enshrining in law an automatic reversion of copyright to the artist 25 years after transfer. Now, Brian Long pulled me aside, said, but you can do that anyway, right? But well, you can if you agreed in the terms, you don't have to change the actual law. But in practice, you can't easily do it. So for example, when I was managing the Australian band Boy and Bear, co-managing them, we had a lot of interest because Richard Kingsmill at Triple J gave them 5 out of 5 stars and said they're brilliant. So we had all these labels trying to sign them. And basically we locked in the booking agent first, because if you don't do that, then the labels will try and herd you towards their preferred booking agent, or they may actually vertically integrate with an agency like Mushroom Group in Melbourne. And we brought a lawyer in early to help navigate the interest. And we tried to move quickly because we knew that such interest is really quite fleeting and we didn't want to stuff it up. And the lawyers helped us, Julian Hewitt at Media Arts Lawyers helped us navigate it all. And basically, we were able to get a license agreement for Australia, New Zealand only. The license expires 10 years after the release of the last committed album. At a five option deal. We could only get that deal because EMI would have signed them otherwise. And the lawyer, us and the lawyer, really leveraged EMI's interest into that deal. And now the artist is independent. They've sold 16,000 tickets across 11 dates. In Australia, they did 2 or 3 forum theatres and sold them out. They sold out Fortitude Valley Music Hall 2 or 3 times. And they're 100% independent because they're post their deal with Universal. But not only that, in probably maybe 7 years from now, they'll get all their master rights back for Australia and New Zealand from Universal, which is awesome. Like, that's a huge win. Like, that's great. But how do you do that in an age in which there's increased monopolisation and Universal now owns EMI? So we couldn't do that now. You couldn't totally piss off EMI to get that deal, which is what we did. They were very angry at us for doing that. But, and I mean, there's this guy, Neil Robertson, who works at Victorian Music Development Office, and he used to manage this Scottish band called Spell and Sebastian. And at Big Sound, he was like, "No, guy, I disagree with you." Scottish accent. And he said, "Oh no, there's heaps of competition now. Like, there's the Orchard, there's all these independent distributors and so on and so forth." But I thought, okay, fair enough, you win that argument. But the next day I woke up and I was like, no, Neil, the band wouldn't have wanted to go with those independent options. They and their parents wanted to go with the known brand name. So yes, it was about universal. Yes, it was about EMI. Whether that would still be the case now is really, in question. So that's just me arguing back against Brian Long's argument that you could actually do this without changing the law. I don't think it's that easy. So there, Brian, take that. You don't have a right to reply. So music artist managers are part of the larger cultural ecosystem. And a theme emerged across the various ideas for the new models and for artist manager retention that I uncovered through the research. The theme is the need for more decentralization in the music business. And if realised, the models outlined in this book would help develop a healthier, stronger, and more independent manager community in this country. This would in turn lead to a more diverse and sustainable cultural ecosystem overall, one with more players and less power in the hands of the few. Thank you very much. Yeah, David, what's up?